If you're a fan of the Foo Fighters or 90s grunge guitar tones, listen up. I've always been a massive fan of the Foo Fighters, and in particular, I've loved the sound of the guitar tones that were on their first record. They were very mid-forward, aggressive, buzzy, but they cut through the mix so well. And for a long time, no one knew what they used to get those tones. But it turns out that they were actually using a super rare, battery-powered amp that was made out of a gas can. Yeah, a gas can. Now, when I found that out, I went down this massive rabbit hole and knew that I had to get my hands on one so that I can model it to use in my own mixes. And that eventually led to me creating a new plugin with my company Carve Audio called the Gas Can Amp. It captures that gritty, mid-forward character of the original amp, but we've expanded on it to make it more usable inside of a modern-day mix. We've got an extended EQ range, and we also have added a gate to help get you more control. And although it's an amp, it's not just meant for guitars. It actually sounds great on vocals, drums, keys, or anything that needs a little bit of extra attitude. So if you want that sound inside of your DAW, visit carveaudio.com, and we've got a 14-day free trial so you can check it out inside of your own mixes. We also have some limited time special intro pricing that you'll want to check out for sure. So once again, that's the Gas Can Amp, and you can find it at carveaudio.com. Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike Navina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. I've got a question for you. What would you do if your very first studio session that you ever did, I'm talking before you even knew how to operate a DAW or set up microphones or track a band, how would you feel if that very first session was with one of rock's biggest engineers working on a massive band? Would you feel nervous jumping into that? Because I sure know I would. But that's actually not a hypothetical situation. That actually happened to today's guest, Sonny DiPerri. Sonny is an engineer, producer, mixer based out of LA, and Sonny has one of the craziest stories that I've ever heard. He's had the chance to work with artists like 30 Seconds to Mars, Trent Reznor, Portugal Demand, Animal Collective, and all of these massive projects happened largely at a time when he was feeling underprepared and wasn't quite feeling ready, as most people would say. And he got the chance to work under famed producer Flood, who has gone on to make some huge records and has been a major mentor to him. And this is just a wild story when you hear it. You know, he talks about literally walking into a house, not knowing anything and being greeted with 30 Seconds to Mars and thinking that he was just going to get fired right away. And instead, what he did throughout that process kept him in the room, got him a job, got him a mentor, and turned into a awesome career that is now going on 20 years long and continues to work with awesome bands. So yeah, this is a pretty wild story that I'm excited for you to hear about, because I constantly hear people talk to me about how they're not feeling ready, they're not prepared, they're not good enough yet, you know, they're not confident in their decisions, all that kind of stuff. And they use this as a crutch for why they can't move forward with their career and why they can't release their music or why they can't get their first client, why they're afraid to just even put themselves out there and let people know that they're an engineer, you know? And that's something that I see constantly holding people back. And I really want to break that mold, because I really believe that sometimes you just got to take a risk. Sometimes you have to take a chance on yourself. And even if you don't know anything, like even if you don't even know how to make coffee, you could still get a job in this industry, as you're going to hear in Sonny's story today. It's just really inspiring, and I think it's something that's going to help a lot of people listening to this who feel stuck and who feel that stress of not being prepared or not ready yet, and who just use that as an excuse. So that ends today, because Sonny shares a lot of great advice in this episode, and I think that if you're someone who's getting started, this is going to be a very relevant interview for you. And even if you're someone who's already in this, you know, Sonny talks a lot about his approach to production and working with bands and a lot of the things that's kept him in the room with artists and continuously working with new and bigger artists, because he's just someone who's very prepared. He has great attention to detail. He's a good hang. There's just so many awesome things that he shares in this episode that you can certainly take and implement into your own life, into your own process, into your own career. And yeah, I think you're going to really enjoy this one. So with that said, let's just jump right into it. Sonny DiPerri, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. How's it going today, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. For people who might not be familiar with you, can you give us a little background on who you are, what you do, and ultimately how you got into all this stuff?
Sure, yeah. I'm an LA-based record producer and recording engineer, and I got into it years ago. I was in bands and did some very light touring. And I was very enamored with the studio, very excited by the studio. I think even in high school, the bands I were playing with, we did some local recording, and it just was so exciting and cool to me, that it was always in the back of my mind. And then through college, being in some bands that were starting to kind of do some stuff, I had some bad studio experiences, and that usually leads to maybe I should do this on my own. Or maybe I should kind of pursue this and not be told by someone that you can't do things because that's not the right microphone to use on whatever,
Fair. Yeah.
And it was, I got really lucky. I was in some bands that failed, decided to move to California from Massachusetts. And I moved out to LA on a whim with no experience, no real agenda. I had a friend out here who was already doing some film stuff. And I thought, man, it would be so cool to live in LA just for 2 years and hang with some friends and maybe go home after that or whatever, And I was living here for, 3 or 4 days. And my buddy said to me, he goes, hey, I found this ad on the UTA list that says multi-platinum band with an A-list producer seeks recording studio assistant. And I really thought, oh man, this is probably some pop stuff or some like big, boy band stuff or fabricated stuff. And I answered the ad just because the studio is so exciting to me and I love it so much. And I answered the ad, went through this interview, met this day-to-day manager, and it turns out it was for 30 Seconds to Mars. And I was going to be apprenticing under Flood, the British producer. And in classic me fashion, I had no idea who anybody was, and I had absolutely zero experience. And I think when people say that, they kind of maybe hide that they kind of knew some stuff. And I can promise you that I knew absolutely nothing. I remember one of my interviews with that band. They walked me into their control room, and they had all this outboard gear, and it was just like, I have no idea what any of this stuff is. Like, have you used Pro Tools before? No. I think I'd seen it in a computer, and I had some friends who were recording, but even still, I had no experience. And so I was a bottom level T-boy and worked.
That's like a dream story, man. Like, so most people get like a job at some shitty local studio and they like struggle for years, like to get any credits or whatever. But like your first project is a massive record.
It was a wild experience. I was fortunate before I moved to LA. I had a few friends, my friend Dean, my friend Randy, my friend Jared. They were either recording school kids or they were totally DIY punk rock kids that had studios in their basement or whatever, And Jared had let me sit in because I helped him tune drums on a session once, but I had no idea what was going on, I think he had this tiny basement studio that was just like a 10 by 10 box or something, And I don't know, I went out to California and somehow I just applied to this interview. And I remember meeting with the band, or the guitar player and the drummer first. And they were kind of joking, saying, you really have no experience? And I said, yeah, I wish I had some knowledge or some experience, but I really don't know how to do anything. And there was kind of a big eye roll and a groan, like, okay, come back tomorrow and meet our producer. I met Flood. He was so kind. And I actually was unaware of who he was at the time. So I just thought he was some cool guy in a jacket, and we were hanging out talking about music and art and all that stuff. And then, he really was asking me, do you have any experience? I said, no, I don't. I have no experience. And he was just kind of saying, you're going to be great then. Because I think he wanted to put his hands, and like really like mold me the way that I think he thinks it needed to be done. So it was cool.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was going to say, like, in a situation like that, for a band of that size, you would think that an engineer or producer like Flood would be like, I need somebody that does have a lot of experience or at least some foundational stuff. But the fact that he was willing to take a chance is quite amazing.
I think that's been a bit of a theme with me. There's definitely been some accidental falling backwards into some situations that have helped out. I think Flood, he's also probably one of the best engineers out there. He was an engineer. He started off just like I did, T-boy, no experience, working his way up through the ranks. And he usually engineers his own records or has an engineer if he needs it. So he had one. And what the band did is they hired me and this other assistant, Jamie. And the whole plan was sort of, because Jamie had a bunch of experience and is an accomplished songwriter and record maker on his own, that I was sort of the gopher and the studio janitor and the duster and just making sure everything was clean and organized all the time. And I think there's a level of, if you kind of do those things and you get those right, then you get the launch order right and you don't make mistakes on patches because it's all, it's all linked a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know one of my early mentors, he was telling me about another engineer that he knew who his first test in the studio for every intern that came through was like, hey, go get us a sandwich. It's got to be a club sandwich. And we want like lettuce, tomato, turkey, like in a specific order. And if it didn't come back that way, you're fired on the spot. It was like, if you can't get the lunch order right, like how can we trust you to do anything right in the studio?
That is harsh. I, luckily didn't have to. I'm sure I was being tested and tried, but I was unaware of it. I was also so excited to be living in Southern California and working 18 hours a day and just having a great time. So,
yeah, for sure.
The fact that I was every day in the studio and have been, it'll be, I think it's 18 or 19 years this August or something. It's a dream come true. It really is.
That's amazing.
It's amazing, yeah.
And so obviously that story with Flood is like kind of your first step in, but then you also said that you've had other experiences that were pretty similar. Can you maybe share some of those stories as well?
Sure. Yeah. I was with that band and Flood for about a year and a half. And then I went overseas to London to shadow Flood more and just see him work in a different environment and see maybe more of the classic Flood/British record production. And I shadowed and did some engineering for Alan as well. Just being around, they were very happy to have an extra set of hands who was doing free labor. And I was happy to do it and proud to do it. Some other experiences that have just been kind of wild is after coming back to the States, I had been friendly with a lot of the engineers on that Mars record and did a bunch of assisting or engineering or running rooms around town I tried to keep in touch with everybody that came through. And so just through a string of events, I ended up meeting someone who was doing some light tour managing, and he ended up introducing me to a studio called King Size, and I became the staff and head engineer there. And that was a little bit more of the traditional one session a day, one session at night, or sometimes a week-long session. And again, there was a revolving door of amazing indie rock engineers, producers, bands that I had been listening to, So it was, again, like a really cool experience to be just a fly on the wall and helping people do that stuff. And I remember, I think they were finishing In the Mountain in the Cloud. Portugal the Man had come through, and I was already aware of them and a fan of them. And it was just those sort of little experiences are enough to really keep you engaged because you feel like this is going to come out. I'm going to buy this at Amoeba Music. I'm going to have a special time, and it feels like a real record. It really did. And doing that record as just the assistant, I remember the singer John said, look, we're going to be in on Sunday, just we'll see you then. And the producer and engineer had said they were taking that day off. And I remember thinking, well, I should show up. The band said that they want to work. And I ended up cutting a song from scratch and basically getting my first chance to produce a real band, And I did it with them, and they ended up taking me to Sonic Ranch 2 years later to start Evil Friends. And it was just another situation where I'm being thrown into the fire and have to figure it out because I'm a little bit out of my depth, it kind of feels nice. And it's been really cool to sort of learn that way.
Yeah, of course.
But, being at a studio like that, you would see all these different techniques. And you'd also learn how to maybe read the room if someone's a little grumpy, or, well, maybe this is not how I like the way these drums sound, but this is what they want and we achieved it, or vice versa. Someone asks me, how does everyone do drums here? How does everyone record this here? And you do it, and the engineer says, I really just don't like that. We got to try something else. So you're constantly workshopping, growing, and as I was doing that, I was also assisting and running at another studio called The Lair, which is now no longer around. But that's another studio where I really cut my teeth and had another mentor, this guy Larry Getz, he's kind of like my audio dad at this point. And he really would come in and peek his head around the corner and say, like, you are totally screwing the pooch. You got to fix this, But he did it away from the artists or bands, so I think that way I could stay and not get bummed,
If you're a fan of the Master Your Mix podcast, you might not even know yet that we actually have a full website packed with a ton of resources designed to help you make better mixes. So head on over to MasterYourMix.com, and on there you're going to find free downloads, cheat sheets, blog articles, books, courses, and a whole bunch more, all designed to help simplify your mixing process, give you more clarity, and help you finish more music without second-guessing every move. And then, if you're looking for more personalized one-on-one help, where I can work directly with you on your tracks and walk you through the recording, editing, and mixing processes step by step, that's exactly what I work on inside of my coaching program, Amplitude. And you can learn more about that at masteryourmix.com/amplitude. And on that page, you can book a free call with me where we can talk through your current process, figure out where your gaps are, and identify the fastest ways to help you move forward with your tracks. And then if it makes sense to work together beyond that call, we can absolutely talk about that too. So once again, that's masteryourmix.com. And then for coaching, masteryourmix.com/amplitude. Yeah, for sure. Man, that's amazing. And didn't you have like a similar story as well when it came to like working with Trent Reznor?
I did. Yeah. So actually at Sonic Ranch with Portugal the Man, this is probably 2 years after I got back from London, I just received a cold call out of the blue from Trent's manager. And he said, is this Sonny DiPerri who's friends with Alan and Flood? And I go, yeah. He goes, cool, I manage an artist that needs an in-house programmer, engineer, assistant, mixer person. Are you interested? I said, yeah, sure. I was in Texas all March and got back end of March, and April 1st had to go, like, you're going to go meet Trent on April 1st. And I'm like, okay, what April Fool's joke is this? Who is really, really fucking with me? Go to the address, go in the house, and you see the Oscar, and you go, oh, this might be his house. And at the time, his name was Eric. I met Eric and said hi or whatever, and then just had a hang with Trent. And we had a really good conversation. He was telling me what he was looking for, how he likes to work, and said, why don't you come back in a week or two and we'll do a remix over the weekend, and Atticus will be here and Alessandro will be here. And yeah, we can just see how you run the session and see how it goes. 3 days turned into a 2-week remix, turned into a 5.5 month trip working up there every day. And yeah, it was a dream come true. To learn from Atticus and Trent and to watch Alessandro just absolutely rip a bugla, to be, just to watch it all happen live. It really, I was fast, I think, before that session, but to keep up with them, I had to be at another level that I didn't think was possible for my own either Pro Toolsing or engineering or, and I had no experience working on an SSL duality at that point. And again, it was sort of like someone's putting their hand on your back, like, all right, here you go, have fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so there was a lot of late nights, a lot of reading the manual, but it was a really special experience because I think I learned, the thing that I took away from that was the magic of molding artistic ideas and technology together because they had multiple computers all synchronized with different software running. So I could press play on the main computer, and then a drum computer was running that was clocked to the same tempo of the track. And they had Logic or Ableton or another Pro Tools computer or a computer that ran stuff for guitars. And, it was like flying a spaceship.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, and every day I was sort of looking over my shoulder waiting for the vaudeville cane to come get me.
That's crazy, dude.
It was crazy.
I mean, it blows my mind because, like, to me, what stands out with all of these stories is just your determination to just get in the room and to like just work your way in, and also like your honesty about it as well. And like, when you're not feeling prepared, you're not trying to fake it. You're being honest with it, and like that actually got you further, than like trying to fake it and then failing and, people judging you based on that. So there's a lot of like resilience in like the way you approach these situations. And I think it's an important lesson too, because I hear from people all the time, they're just like afraid to take chances, like they're afraid to get like their first client because they feel like they're not ready or like, they're not good enough yet. And then here you are like stepping into like major label artists on your first day, like, not knowing anything. And then you're just crushing it. And now you've built a career based on like just that one opportunity that then turned into another and another, So it's pretty wild to hear that.
I think it is really important to be honest in the studio. I think it's also really important to spend the extra time when people aren't there to, if you don't know how something works, to figure it out, or to simulate situations where you can figure it out. That way, when somebody shows up to record, everything is good to go and you just simply push the button and they go. And that's been something that I think I took with me like from that early Mars record, because Flood was there with his engineer Rob, and then 7 or 8 other engineers who were high functioning mixers who are just incredible engineers and producers on their own, were showing me the stuff, or some of them told me to shut my mouth and sit on the bench and just watch them record whatever. And when it was quiet, I could ask a question because I'm so chatty and so curious. And so I think that something that I try to do still every day in the sessions is set the situation up before people get ready to go. That way, if someone says, I really want to play guitar, you just kind of hand them a cable, or I want to sing, that mic's on and the headphone mix is done and it's not distorted. And there is some effects if you want to sing with effects. That preparedness, I think, goes a long way. And when somebody forgets or doesn't actually know that they're recording, you get the juice. You really get the stuff that is in the records that I grew up listening to, that I aspire to make records of that quality.
Yeah. So what does that actually look like in practice? Like this idea of them not knowing they're being recorded. Like how do you approach that? Okay, yeah.
That's a great question. Yeah, people know, but that's a good question. So I try to set up the studio a day before. And I travel a lot to work. So I have a full studio here that I can track and mix out of, but it's not the right sound or right fit for everybody. So it's working in town in Hollywood, traveling anywhere to go make a record. I always tell people if there's Pro Tools and a computer, I'll go. I'll even mix like that. That's fine. And so I try to get in a day before, set up everything, line check everything, and try to talk to everybody in pre-production about what they're going for, how they like to work, what doesn't work for them, and what's they're looking to do differently this time around. And I'll try to set up little stations or really detailed mics and just kind of get it going, and a lot of floater mics too. And so when it's time to switch gears, let's say we've been tracking drums for 2 days and someone goes, I'd love to play bass. It's already up. It's already good. It's already, obviously we probably have to dial the sound a little bit, But I try not to dial in solo either. I try just to put up the drum mix and let someone start to play to it and just start wrenching the sound to make it fit. And if they're happy, we just, okay, let's start doing takes. You know, I try to keep all of the experiments away from people unless they really want to do that. You know, I'll put a couple of mics up on a guitar cab or a bass cab and just sort of balance it on the console the way that I want it, or kick one out. And just, if someone says that sounds exactly the way I want it to sound, then we go. And even if it's not exactly what I was maybe conceptualizing, the fact that they are connected to the sound and the performance that's all that matters.
I love that. Yeah, it's like less sitting around for the artist while you're getting levels and all this stuff, right? And then just like them coming in and being inspired, being like walking into the studio and just being able to actually track right away.
Yeah. And there's always going to be, you know, the way a drummer hits is different than the way either I play drums or the assistant played when we were dialing things in, you know, but that's a small adjustment. And once you have the drummer of the band or solo project sit down, it probably takes another 10 minutes and you're good to go. And I also don't, I try to not do the, hey, can you hit the snare? You know, I try to do it as one big instrument. And so I always kind of laugh when I record something and I'll mix it later with fresh perspective. I'm always kind of looking around saying, who let me do this? Like that, this makes, because in solo, they sound terrible, you know, but it works as one big blob. And that's the important
But I mean, that's how it's supposed to end up, right? So why wouldn't you do it that way? Yeah.
It is. It's just, it's hard. And then you sort of find yourself, you know, the more records you make, the more stuff you mix, you find yourself having a different standard of excellence. And then when you're at ground zero getting sounds, you're kind of wrestling with it and getting a little frustrated because you know what it's supposed to be, but it doesn't sound right yet.
For sure.
And so you're constantly fishing for what's wrong or what needs to be changed.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, like just the way you described your session setup process, like I can see how as someone getting into this and like getting started, like having that proactive approach is like such a valuable thing for an artist or a producer to have in the studio. But in those early days, like going back to when you were getting just getting started and not really knowing what you were doing, like what do you think it was that made you stick around? You know, like for all these people that are listening to this thinking like I'm not ready, or like why me? Like why would anyone give me a shot? Like what do you think it was that really made you stand out and allow you to have that opportunity?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think everything is so exciting to me still. And I think the biggest thing that I encourage people to do, and I have a protege now who helps out, is I think if you are able to keep the session moving, even on a small level, you know, I remember when I had no experience and literally did not know the difference between any piece of equipment, I was making sure I was cleaning the studio. I was taking the trash out. The coffee pot was on, even though I didn't drink coffee at the time. And I can probably tell you it was just mud in a glass. You know,
I know exactly what you're talking about. I didn't drink coffee like for the first like 10 years that I worked in a studio. And when I finally when I finally tried it, I'm like, this is what I've been serving? Sludge? And like
I know. And I think the biggest thing is that I still think it's important to have a really positive attitude, to really be excited, and to just, I don't know, it blows my mind to watch someone play guitar. I don't play guitar, so it's one of those things where I'll sit there and just go, I cannot believe this person is doing this. And I think when I was starting out, I would sit in the back of the room or sit off to the side because it was kind of a funny shaped control room, and I would try to just watch how the session was going. And if I saw, hey, they're starting to talk about singing, or they're starting to talk about a drum overdub or something, I would kind of just go into the vocal booth and make sure the headphones were still working, the headphones were still plugged up, things were organized there. Or, you know, I remember 2 weeks ago we did guitar, but I don't know if those lines are even on still, or did we move those cables? And so I would at night go in and make sure it was good. So if someone was inspired, they go, oh, my guitar's tuned. Cool. Now, some people also don't like their equipment being touched. So I also, you have to kind of figure that out when you're there. But it was, and not to be dramatic, but it was sort of like my life depends on this because I had no backup option. So, and I was aware that I was in a very once in a lifetime opportunity. So I really wanted to do a good job. And it's something that I still take very seriously, making sure someone feels comfortable performing in front of me, or tracking together. I think that is something to not take lightly,
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're a very observant guy to begin with. And so I imagine that, I mean, when you combine like being observant with being proactive and having this like thirst for knowledge and improvement and stuff like that, like that's a pretty good recipe for a good engineer. And I imagine that like you're probably getting into a lot of conversation. You did explain how like you'll talk to a lot of artists ahead of time and get a sense of like what they like and what they don't like. But I imagine too, like even in those early days where you were just getting started, it's just a matter of like, okay, what's my role here? And like, can I speak? Do I not? Like, like even just like having those kind of conversations with the people you're working with is such an important way of just knowing what to do and what not to do.
And I can tell you that I have definitely flown too close to the sun. I have been checked a few times, especially starting out and recently as well. I think, and I remember on a record where they didn't have a drum tech. I'm a third generation drummer, so I can handle tuning and I can handle all that stuff. I remember I had started retuning a drum because it had fallen out of tune or the head was damaged or something. And I held up the drummer, I held up the producer, I held up the engineer, because as soon as I saw something happen, I went, oh, I got to go fix that. And I didn't even think to maybe see if they were about to go re-record drums. And so I'm aware that, yes, the new snare head probably sounded better. But when you see that you caused the inspiration to sort of go out the door, then I had to kind of put my head down and ask for forgiveness and, that sort of thing.
Fair,
that is important to... Because I'll tell you, I don't forget that. That was in 2009, and I still think about that.
I mean, it obviously had like a lot of weight and importance in what you do. Yeah. And it kind of reminds me too, like I was reading up on some interviews that you've done, and one of the interviews I saw, you'd mentioned that one of the most important things that you had learned throughout like your early apprentices was that it wasn't about the gear, and it was more about like the mindset for the artist and like helping them get their vision to come to life. So, I mean, to me, this is just a perfect example of that. Like, making sure you're not getting in the way of their creativity and their flow.
Yeah, and I love gear. Do not get it twisted. I love equipment. But it is something that I think about often, because there's that thing where if a singer hears themselves on a really, not a nice mic, but the right mic for their voice for the first time, that's when they forget they're recording. And they give you performances that they didn't know that they could do, And there are other times where I have a snare drum that's this old stencil. I don't even know. I think it's supposed to be a Slingerland or a Roger. I don't even know what it's supposed to be. It's this old stencil snare drum that's never had the heads changed. I kind of tune it. I kind of don't tune it, and it was $100 or something, and it works better than the amazing Black Beauty that I have and this other custom, And so sometimes that's the best option too. I always think about that stuff. And I don't know if someone said this to me or if I just say it all the time. But one thing I keep in mind is that nobody ever whistled a reverb preset. And
So
I think that it's something that I just think about it all the time, That being said, if I'm alone mixing, because I'm of two minds, I'm the first to admit that I'm going through every possible setting I can to find the right thing for whatever I'm mixing, whether it's vocal or drums or whatever, So
Yeah, of course.
producing, I'm a little more chaotic. Mixing, I'm a little bit more methodical, and I have a little bit more of a rigid process.
Of course, yeah. So then when it comes to like getting into like the mind of an artist and understanding like what it is that they're going for, whether you're an engineer or you're producing a project, like how do you approach that as far as like understanding really like, how to get that sound that they hear in their head to come out, and understanding the project on that level, like not your own personal taste, but more what they're looking for, and making sure that you're not interjecting with like gear things and stuff like that.
So in pre-production, there's a lot of conversations about what people are trying to achieve. I also ask people what they're inspired by. Sometimes it's other people's recordings that they show me. Sometimes it's books that they're reading or movies that they're watching. And then if we are local, like if we're in Southern California or I can travel for a pre-production meeting, I will ask people to listen to the demos with me. And I don't really suggest, I try not to lead people, but I say, what about this song? What are you trying to go? What are you going for? And some people will say, sometimes the demo is really just an iPhone recording of just them at band practice. And sometimes it's a solo artist that I'm producing that's got the most detailed, perfect demo of all time. And it's a lot. I spend more time in pre-pro than I do making the album usually. And it's a lot of me trying to get on their level. So show me what's inspiring to you. Let's listen to music together that's not the demos. And show me songs or artists that you are just absolutely floored by. That way I can try to maybe thread the needle a little bit and try to figure out, okay, cool, I see what they're going for. Or maybe they love a distorted vocal and they don't know it, but every vocal they showed me as a home recordist or something, Or every song that they've showed me has bone dry, minimally mic'd drums. So the last thing that I want to do is roll into a studio with room mics only, just cranked, that sort of thing. And I think once you get there, and the big thing is pre-production too, out away from the computers and all that stuff, really neutralizes everybody in a good way, because people are responding in real time to what they're hearing or what they're doing, or you can say to them, hey, I think the song is just really slow. Can we speed it up? Or vice versa. Or can we change the key of this? It seems like you're having a hard time singing it. That sort of stuff. Because I think records are made in pre-production, really not in production.
I love that. No, that makes complete sense to me, because that's really where you're mapping out what you're tracking. It's just a roadmap for what's to come. It's not. I think sometimes like when you get to when you start like messing around too much in like that tracking stage and like reshaping the song and stuff like that, it just kind of sets things back, and it kind of like gets people out of that momentum. So it's once you know the song, it's just easier to just go in and get it done quick. Yeah,
and I think there's two ways, right? There's the long preparation and really fast execution, which is a very there's not a lot of big budget records happening, and you don't have 6 months to try out every Ampeg SVT in the city to pick the best one, right? I think there is a sweet spot where you can do a lot of preparation and everyone knows the material. I went through a record recently where we did a lot of preparation, and the album was tracked over probably 2.5, 3 weeks, but we broke it up. Maybe a month, and we broke it up into 2 or 3 sessions. And that led to some rearrangement and restructure because everyone knew their parts. So there wasn't this level of, what am I supposed to play in the bridge? It's like, hey, maybe the bridge is too short. That sort of thing. So,
as a producer, like, what is your approach to production? Because some people, it's like the producer is just there to be the guy who makes sure that you got good takes. And then other people, it's like you want to be more involved in the songwriting or, the arrangements or, there's so many different elements that could be defined as a producer. So like, how do you see that role?
I am a little bit of everything. So in pre-production, people will tell me the songs are bulletproof. We don't want to touch them. And I'll kind of ask, I'll pry, and I'll kind of sneak around a little bit. And if they're just very transparent or like, no, dude, we're good. We got it handled. We're happy. We need you to handle the sonics and really elevate the performances. That's what I focus on. But there are other artists that in pre-production, they're open to me changing key, changing tempo, changing structure and arrangement. We at least try it. And I think that that's something that it takes 10 minutes. You give it a whirl. And if it works, cool. And if it doesn't work, no big deal. I think that my biggest thing as a producer is to keep it distilled and to keep it very real. My records I like that it sounds like someone's given away a piece of themselves. And that's the music that I love, regardless of genre. And that's what I want to make sure comes across, is you can really hear someone going for it. And that to me is vital.
For sure. So then, like, as far as helping people with making changes, like what do you think are some of the most common changes you find yourself either, suggesting to a band or that they come to you thinking like, oh, we need help with this? Do you find that like bands are coming to you with arrangements that need to be cut down, or like are there things like that you commonly see that end up being what you work on the most in pre-production?
It's different every single time. I know that's the worst response I could give you, but it really is different. There are records where I'm there doing the homework to really think about how I have to make a version of the demo that's elevated for people. There are other times where I'm in a rehearsal space for months with a band, working out arrangement, working out tempo, working out. And I think in those situations, you're also working out, hey, this section doesn't feel quiet enough. So can we turn off the distortion pedals? Can we go down to a cleaner bass tone or something? There's a lot of that. So there really is no one size fits all. And I wish that, maybe I had more of a consistency in that department, but I think it also keeps me really engaged because I can go from doing a songwriter that's stripped down and a 1 or 2 person project to tracking a 5-piece live band that's in drop A, literally, and being just as comfortable, Yeah. And so there's really, I'm always just trying to ask people what they're going for. And especially if we've never worked together, it's like, hey, what are you trying to get this time around? And sometimes they want me to weigh in and say, hey, I think the top line could be stronger, but I'm not writing it. It's kind of, I'm sending them away to come back with 2 new verse vocals to see what they get, or 2 new bridge vocals.
That makes sense.
That sort of thing. Yeah,
that's interesting. So then for someone like you who, like, I mean, you said songs are made in the pre-production stage. And so like, to me, that implies like you're really working those songs early on and then, just jumping into the tracking more or less. But I remember reading that when you were working with Animal Collective, you guys kind of had this term you guys called inversions, which was, basically like you would record the song in full and then you would basically re-record it, switching out all of the instruments with different instruments and stuff like that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process and what that looked like?
Yeah. So they were doing that on their own. They went to, I think they were in North Carolina, I think. And then when we went into the studio, we were still doing some of that. There wasn't a necessarily take this box of ideas and put it on the ground inversion, but there was a lot of experimentation with, we know that we have the song the way that we want to do it. But I don't think they would say to me, I don't love the sample that we were manipulating. How do we recreate this audio sample? How do we... And I remember there was a lot of sequenced percussion on a song. That record, Painting With, was tracked live, and it was all done on their modular rigs. And it was performed, the basics were performed live. It was an amazing thing to watch. And I remember a few different instances on that album where some of the percussion that they had demoed and tried to workshop on their own, and then in pre-production couldn't really get it right. We tried everything under the sun to make it work. And I think it ended with us figuring out that if we did an instrument rental as well. So there was all this esoteric percussion and like movie soundtrack stuff, that if we performed one of the guys playing percussion on a kiddie pool that was in the studio, that was the right sound. Or I remember there was this, because Brian's main instrument is audio sample manipulation, which is still the most incredible thing I've ever seen. How does somebody grab a 2-second sample of something and then stretch it and mangle it into a keyboard sound that he then performs? I don't have that mind, but I remember there was one that we could not figure out, and they had this amazing, amazing piano at East West. And Brian really wanted the manipulated sound to be replaced with this piano somehow, And I remember him saying to me, it's got to be more, I think he said it's got to be more Dracula or something. And I took all these chains and put them on top of the piano, like over the soundboard, and they went and played the part, and it was exactly what we needed it to be. But they were so prepared that spending an hour going fishing and sending the probe out to find the right thing was not a big deal. Because when it came time, you turned the mic on, it was already mic'd up. The headphone box was already there, was already ready to go. And I could just push record. Dave could play the part. Off we go, Yeah,
that makes sense.
It was really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot more sense to me, because when I first read about this inversions idea, like my thought was that it was almost like this, a roll of the dice. Like, what are we going to do with this? Like, is it going to be a bass or, kind of just totally messing with things altogether. But it makes sense that there was at least, they had an idea in mind of what they didn't like. And, that would give you some direction in terms of what to focus on.
I think in pre-production, they were definitely rolling the dice a bit, but that's a band where, when we were talking earlier about really sort of watching things kind of happen, there are moments when when you have to help, and there are moments when you gotta just keep your mouth shut because they're about to crack the code, And so I remember they were really trying to figure out some vocal production stuff, and one of the parameters that was set is we don't want to use any digital manipulation of the voice because they had already done a lot of that. So I remember watching them sing and listening to how they were singing and thinking, I bet you if we do some sort of looping, I can get them to sing a lot, and then I can layer stuff, send it to their tape machine and back, and it'll be what they want. And then they gave me the freedom to try that. So I was able to edit the vocal, comp the vocal, layer it up, zip it back to the half-inch machine and back, and then say, hey, I've done a rough mix. Do you want to come back into the studio and take a listen? That way, they had a break. I could get the wiggles out and try a bunch of different things and not feel like somebody was over my shoulder saying, what are you doing? Like, this is just not good, Just as a musician gets to make a bunch of mistakes writing and performing before they get to the studio, I got to make a bunch of mistakes and decide what I wanted to present to them.
Which I think is actually a very cool way of working, like to really give everybody their chance to experiment and mess up, but also like come together to make this really cool collaborative thing.
Oh yeah. It was an incredible experience to work with them. We did 4 projects together. It was a dream come true. It really was.
That's amazing. So like when you're experimenting that much and, maybe trying different instrumentation or maybe different arrangement ideas or whatever, like how do you go about deciding ultimately what is the best thing to do? Because I'm sure there's going to be times where there's going to be disagreements and, maybe one person has an idea in mind of what they want it to sound like. Another person has a different idea. So how do you guys navigate that kind of process?
Depending on who I'm with, I really do think my role is helping people make decisions, even if it's not the thing that I'm looking to hear. if I can help somebody make a decision on if something's coming out of the speakers and they go, that's exactly what I want, then we did it. And I don't necessarily think there is a best or perfect option. I think the best way to go about it is to take the ideas, try the ideas, and then listen to them fresh, whether it's a 5-minute break or you open a song up a day later. Because that little bit of musical amnesia goes a long way. And I always try to remind myself, because I'll definitely get into the jungle with people and really, it's my chance to pretend like I'm in a band again. So I want to make sure that my ideas are getting heard or whatever, and I really do at the end of even on a record I was just tracking recently. We were talking about guitar tone, and then that segued into how they wanted to sing the stuff. And I remember we were starting to get the guitar tones, and in my mind I thought, we're almost there. This is almost what I'm looking to hear. And the guitar player said, this is exactly what I've been chasing for 5 years. And you're like, okay, let's go. If as soon as they make the decision, you go. It's not about what you want to hear. They'll hear you out, and the artist will tell you if they like it or they don't like it. And that's very good feedback in real time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. There's definitely that delicate balance of like when you're an engineer who really does understand this stuff. Like, I mean, presumably these artists are coming to you because you're the expert at the engineering side of things, and so in your mind, you might have this little ego about it, like, oh, I know I can do a better sound, or there's something cooler I can go to. But yeah, I think if someone's like, this is the sound I've been looking for 5 years, like you're just like, okay, that's good. Let's stop there. Let's not fuck around with that vision.
I think since there is no rule of this is how it's supposed to be, I think there's a level that if it sounds good to the room, then it's good. And I think that even goes for mixing sometimes. That's why I have a set of big speakers and a set of really small speakers, because on the bigger speakers that I work on, everything sounds incredible. And I am a god among men, and I am the best mixer to ever live. And then I put them down on the small speakers, and I realize I cannot hear the vocal. And I cannot pick out anything out of that mix. And you get humbled real quick. And I think that's the thing, right? Is that you get pushed to make something feel a certain way. And if everyone loves it, then that's how it's supposed to feel. And those flaws and those warts are really important. That stuff is, as a record maker, the stuff I really encourage people to keep in is that human element. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's like the sooner, as an engineer, the sooner you can learn to handle like giving someone else their vision instead of yours, like the sooner you can master that, the happier of an engineer you'll be, because like, when it comes to mixer visions, you're not going to be like butthurt that someone changes the sound that you spent so much time working on or whatever, like it's like,
of course
there's some, I think that's the first time I've used butthurt on this podcast. I love it.
Oh, I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Yes.
That another thing I think is really important too is that I watched so many different types of people make albums that I remember going to a studio where they would strike the studio and make it a totally blank slate every time they finished. And then another producer had everything set up and the drum set never changed. And all his records sound amazing. He has a signature thing. I'm like, oh, yeah, I know. That's totally so-and-so. But that's how they love to work. And so I think it's really important to sort of see a little bit of all of that. And just because you watch one person do something one way, that doesn't mean that's the way to do it. It's for you to pick up some more colors to paint with, for lack of a better analogy. But I think that's really important, because the biggest thing I think everyone should do is commit and make decisions and not leave everything open. And so once you start doing that, every little decision informs the next decision. If you commit to that drum sound and you print a ton of EQ and compression going in, all right, here we go. This is the sound.
Yeah.
And it's not changing tomorrow. Or when I move to another studio, everything sounds the same.
Yeah. So then on that note then of like committing and trying to get that like if you're going to commit, presumably the idea is that you're committing because you're trying to get the final sound up front and getting there. But going back to what we were talking about earlier about not getting in the way of the artist and the momentum and all that kind of stuff, there's also that balance there too sometimes of like working fast for the sake of keeping that creativity flowing versus, if I spend a little bit more time on this, I can get it closer to the album sound or the mix sound, So like how do you navigate that as well?
That's a good question. I try my best to get it not final when you're tracking. Obviously, there's going to be things that change a little bit when you mix. I try to really commit the vibe of everything as much as I can. And then that's, I think, the beauty of, I don't necessarily work on a song until it's done and then start the next song. What I'll do is I'll get something moving and then I'll say, we should put this down for a day or two. Work on something else. And usually in that other window, you usually discover a better drum sound or better rhythm guitar. And then when you open up the other tune fresh, you end up doing some re-recording. Or you end up doing maybe we leave this alone and this was actually okay. And I think that there's a level of not necessarily printing it done, but there's a level of making sure it's the right tuning of the drums you want, meaning we wanted a medium-tuned snare or a low-tuned floor tom, like things like that. I really don't take guitar DIs. I probably should. I never do it. I just commit to it as like an absolute lunatic, but that's, I think, the way to do it, That's how I learned. So the way I kind of try to do it is I track everything and then in the mornings when the band or artist isn't in, I'll come in for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'll kind of do some light balancing and light mixing. And sometimes that is tossing an EQ plug on, or sometimes it's not. It's just balancing what we have. And then that's been my hour to really make something feel a little bit closer to done. So the band or artist comes in and says, that sounds better than we thought. Or that sounds a lot worse than we thought. And then you can adjust from there. And that balance or doing overdubs into that balance then informs all of it. And I'm constantly mixing. From the second the faders come up, I'm constantly mixing. I'm even trying to sometimes leave Pro Tools at 0. And I'm trying to do my drum balance going to Pro Tools or tape or whatever. But
interesting. Yeah, that's no, of course. I mean, that is the dream, right? One of my early mentors, he was like, yeah, the dream is to have that like meter stick mix where you just pull up all the faders up to one spot and they're all set, right? But it's like impossible, right?
It's impossible. And I think now, that meter stick mix is taking your Pro Tools session and opening it up and it sounds the same as it did from studio to studio. So I think sometimes what I try to do is not go super plug-in heavy, because you travel from your studio to another studio or vice versa. You might not have all the same software. So if you can really get the vision going and have it be either raw audio or printed and committed on separate tracks, you can pick up where you left off. That's really important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's the meter stick mix.
Yeah, no, it's very accurate, and like I understand that. It's like the number of times I've gone to a studio and they don't have a certain plugin that was on the mix, and it's like, oh fuck, like now what? Now like it's brutal.
It's the worst.
So
it's a learning lesson, though, right?
Yeah, it really does force you to just like be way more prepared and really think through your decisions. Yeah,
I think it's. I also watched someone record once where they took. I think they had trained in the 70s or early 80s or something like that. And I remember watching this engineer had all these drum mics and it was just the most amazing drum sound to me. And I look at the computer and it was 4 tracks. And I had just had a panic attack watching this person work, but that's how they learn. And so all the decisions, phase seemed fine to me. Polarity seemed great. Print it.
Yep.
Commit to it, And sometimes you get burned, and getting burned is how you learn.
But sometimes even just like looking back at those old mixes, like if you ever get your hands on any of those old multi-tracks, like they're so revealing in terms of like how efficient people worked. Like I remember seeing some of the Def Leppard multi-tracks, and it's like really vocals, like all these background vocals are down to like 4 tracks or something like that. Like how the fuck did they do that?
I think it's also worth talking about is even if it's not your preferred way to work, doing something where you treat yourself to making a record on tape, or you buy yourself an 8-track and just get into that level of decision making, you learn a lot. Because I did a couple of all analog records, including the mix, all analog. And I just remember looking at, you get the track sheet and you're sitting there going, I can't print the 3 guitar mics on 3 tracks. I can't. Because if we do that, I can't do any backing vocals. You have to think 3 or 4 steps down the road. And it's really important. I think like that. I think those experiences, I take them with me because they really inform how I like to work when you can do 300 tracks in Pro Tools, So it's really fun too. I think it's really freeing for artists where to fire MIDI into, 7 keyboards and have them come up on a little dinky mixer and just do the blend on the mixer and send it out to 2 tracks in Pro Tools. Mm-hmm. And that's the sound. And sometimes you have to redo it twice.
But I think the main takeaway with those things, with those kind of projects, is that it's not about perfection. It's about feel and what you're feeling in the moment. And because we have the ability now to have infinite tracks and play with plugins forever and whatever, it's like I think this shift has happened where it's gone away from feel and more towards like everything's got to be perfect. There's a specific thing I have to always do, or like there's just too much pressure and emphasis on perfection rather than just like realizing it's about the music at the end of the day, and that's what people are going to react to.
Yeah, and the thing is I think it's what your artistic or creative ideals are. If you are somebody or an engineer producer that loves a certain style, and that's the style that you want to work in, and you're comfortable and really good at it, do it. I think if our records and recordings are extensions of who we are as engineers, producers, and mixers, right? So I hear a lot of myself in those records that I work on. And I think it's because I don't like certain things. So I don't necessarily hyper perfect everything. Maybe I should, but I don't. I'm just not like that. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I work a certain way.
For sure. Yeah. So, you know what I think inspires you. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. Because I really love the idea of some of the recordings that I still listen to and love that are inspirational to me. They're amazing performances. And that's, I think that's really important. An amazing performance is so much more compelling and inviting to listen to than something that's been hyper chopped up. But that's just where I'm at, Mm-hmm. Someone else might have a different take.
For sure. I think it's like heavily dependent on, like you said, like the styles of music that you're working on, the styles of production that you're inspired by. Like some people, I know people that will record literally note by note, and like that concept.
Sure.
Like I can't imagine doing that, like it just seems so tedious and like not the way I like to think about it, but I get it. And those people get amazing results and they're inspired by their own work when they do it that way. So good for them,
That's as good as, and that's what matters is that they're happy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Dude, this has been awesome, man. I've really loved learning more about your approach to all of this stuff. And
sure.
I mean, I feel like I could chat your ear off so much more about so many other topics. But
what else
I
you want to know?
I want to be respectful of your time. But I mean, I guess at the end of the day, with all of this stuff, like in your mind, what ultimately?
So if there's something that you want to ask about, please fire away.
We could dive into all the mixing side of things or whatever. But
sure.
But I mean, like, it's just at the end of the day, like with all of this stuff, like in your mind, what ultimately makes a great song?
Oh, that's tough because I'm either listening to Joni Mitchell or Godspeed You Black Emperor. So I don't know. Oh man, what makes a great song? I still think, for me personally, there's a balance and a blend of an amazingly catchy, singable melody coupled with the lyrical content and performance of someone giving away a piece of themselves. And that, to me, is moving, and it will always keep me engaged. I don't think it's a song has to be 3.5 minutes, but it can be, So it's really about the feeling for me and the sort of message and performance.
And so I guess as a follow-up to that, when you're the one working on a song, how do you know when you're done with it?
Mix or tracking and production?
I guess both. The tracking and production side of it, I guess you have to know in advance that okay, we've got all the parts and this is the best version of the song. But then the mix is also a whole other way of approaching that same angle, right?
Yeah. So when I'm recording or producing a record, the way I know something is done is because I work on all of the songs all the time. Even if the artist and I only work on 2 or 3 songs one day, I've heard in the morning, because I've been mixing and balancing, I've heard probably the other 7 that we haven't worked on. I know when it's done when I listen back to the monitor mix and it feels right to me. I'm not questioning anything other than I'm listening to the song going, this is great. And if that means after we listen to a song and we forgot a guitar lead, or maybe we need one more backing vocal on something, then we'll do it and we'll know it's done. But if I close my eyes and listen and I actually just don't think about the production and just think about the song, then I personally think that we're done. From a mix point of view, when I drop stuff down to the little tiny speakers and after a break I come back in and listen, if I hear everything very clearly on the little speakers, I just print it and send it. And it's up to the feedback of the artist at that point. I have a little bit of a methodical process where I want to ride things and get things feeling a certain way. But then I spend about a day and a half or a day mixing the song, and then I put it away and listen to it the next day. And then I kind of hear all the mistakes that I've made. And from there, I'll just a couple of rides, small break, check on the small speakers again, off we go.
Yeah.
Or I'm looking for notes at that point.
Yeah. But it sounds like, you just said you have a pretty methodical process with it. So
sure.
Presumably it's if you're going through that process and you've done it so many times now that you know that once you get to a certain step, whether it's your automation stage or you're writing things or whatever, once that's done, you're probably already in that point where things are sounding clear and that mix on the small speakers should be working pretty well.
Yes. The other thing that I do that I think really helps me is so let's say I finish and send out a mix by lunchtime and I'll start the mix prep, or maybe I've already prepped the session and I'm just mixing the next song for the second half of the day, right? I will, if it's a small track count, or if that sort of balance is feeling good and I've got everything moving, I'll print that as sort of like a overnight or a nighttime mix. And then I'll save that version and go through my process and finish it and do all the little tweaks and nooks and crannies and the things to make me feel like a mixer, And then I will compare that mix to the overnight mix where I wasn't thinking about all the little details. And usually what happens is there are some bold choices because I don't have any perspective, right? And so I'll listen the next day and go, man, that guitar or that hi-hat was so loud in that mix. But something just makes me want to play air drums or feel it or something, And I respect that. So I try to then incorporate what I've manicured too much and smoothed out the rough edges too much. I try to bring some of that, I call it the slime. I try to bring the slime back a little bit.
Absolutely. No, I love that approach.
Yeah.
And it's just again, leaning into that, those initial reactions to the music and how it felt. And like, that might just be the earliest mix might be the best one. It reminds me of a story I heard. It reminds me of a story that I heard. I don't know. I don't know that this is true, but I heard a story that with like Michael Jackson, I think it was with like Billie Jean or something like that. They were mixing it, and it was like him and the engineer, and they got to like the 90-second mix revision of that song. It was like something ridiculous, like almost 100 revisions, and then like Quincy Jones finally like came in the room like days later and was like, "What the hell are you guys doing? Like, why are you still on this?" And like he's like, "Okay, play me mix 92, and then." Cool. Bring up mix 2, and mix 2 ended up being the one that was the right one. So
and sometimes mix 92 is the best mix. I think but sometimes mix 2 is the best one too. I think that's the thing is some people think that because they've made changes, it is better, or it's more aligned with the vision that they're talking about, or they've changed directions. And so I know I wanted an upfront dry vocal, but now I want it kind of upfront with a ton of delay on it or a ton of reverb, And there's always a sort of meet in the middle, I think. But the biggest thing that I force myself to do, because I mix alone for the most part, is to check fresh between that overnight mix or night mix and my super technical, methodical mix. Because that perspective, I usually finish my rides and I'll think, I absolutely crushed this. This is as good as this can sound. And then I'll listen to the overnight mix and go, oh man, way better. And I think that some of those classic records, doesn't matter the genre, sometimes the mix it was barely a thing. It was just put the faders up. Yeah, I can hear this. I can hear that. Cool. Pan it, print it. And they mix 3 songs a day. I think that's, when I was talking about working analog, I think that's an experience that everyone should have, is whether you work on tape or not, is going into a studio, tracking it, taking a week off, going back into a studio, and for 2 days just balancing and printing the record and making decisions there. It might not be your best work, but you learn so much from the courage of commitment.
Of course.
And decision making. Yeah.
I love that. Like I'm always encouraging people listening to the podcast or like my coaching students or whatever. It's like work with limitations. Like even if it's just like in your practice time, tell yourself you can only make a mix in half hour, or that you can only make one EQ move per channel or something like that. That's like, you're not necessarily going to get the best mix, but you're going to learn so much about what you can get away with. And that is the biggest lesson to take from it, because you'll start simplifying and getting better results just because of that idea of minimalism and really just focusing on the feel.
Yeah, one person I worked for a while, I remember, I'll never forget it. He was saying to me, he goes, "Dude, you just got to mix like you're already getting fired." And I was like, "Well, what are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, that way you just do what you think is best. And if that way you don't have to worry about the minutia of stuff, right?" And so there's been some albums that I've ended up mixing because I made roughs, and band management, label, and someone's like, "This sounds like you're already there. Why don't you just take the guy that you were in with and just finish the mixes?" Because I was thinking, well, so-and-so is going to come in here and mix this and do a way better job than me. So I just want these guitars to sound like this. Here you go. I want the vocal to be like this. That's a roadmap. Have fun, man. But I wasn't precious about anything. And I think people are really precious about stuff. And I think sometimes you have to not be.
Absolutely. Well, dude, I think that all brings it full circle here. Like, just this idea of just trusting your gut, going all forward for it, even when you're not like, it doesn't need to be perfect. You're just going to do it and do your best job. Man, this has been awesome, like learning about your process. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Sure.
If people want to learn more about you or like maybe even work with you, like what's the best way for them to do that?
They can probably track me down online. I have a website, I have Instagram. I also am lucky enough to work with management. I'm with Next Wave Management. They can hit me up there or just say hi. I'm always around. I love chatting. So awesome, whatever people want to know, or like I said, if you have anything you want to pick my brain about, please, I'm here for it.
Absolutely, man. Dude, I appreciate this so much. So thank you so much. Right on, man. So that was my interview with Sonny DiPerri. I hope you enjoyed that one. I definitely did. I loved his story. Like, I loved hearing him talk about all of those times that he wasn't quite, quote unquote, ready, but he still walked in the room, and even if he didn't know what he was doing, he was honest with people, and that got him so many gigs. Just that honesty. It's not a fake it till you make it kind of approach that he took. He just led with brutal honesty, but this hunger to make sure that he did what was needed. He, stepped up when he needed to. He sat back when he needed to. He was quiet when he needed to, but he was always proactive and helpful and friendly, and all of that went a really long way and ultimately led to the career that he has now and the awesome credits that he has too. So yeah, I just think that that's a really, really cool story. And, like I said at the beginning of this episode, I know so many people are just getting held back by this idea of not feeling ready. And Sonny's story, I think, just really proves that you don't have to be ready. You just got to take a chance on yourself. You just have to want it enough that you're willing to maybe mess up, but you're just going to put yourself out there. And that can ultimately lead to so many awesome things. So yeah, I really loved hearing about his story. And then it was awesome to just hear him talk about his philosophy on production and how he likes to keep a session moving. Everything from how he preps the day before he gets into the studio with an artist to making sure that he's got all the levels and the artist can just like be creative and be in the moment and have momentum going. All of that stuff really makes him a valuable asset in the studio. So it was cool to learn more about that approach there. And also how we talked about putting so much emphasis on like pre-production. I love what he said about how songs are made in pre-production, not during production or during tracking. I totally understand what he's saying. Like, if you spend that time early on to establish your vision for your project, it just makes everything you're going to do moving forward so much easier because you have this end goal in mind and you're already comfortable with the song. You already know the parts. You know how things are going to come together really easily. So it's just a matter of that point of just implementing it, right? So yeah, I thought that was really cool to hear him talk about too. And even that idea of mix like you're already getting fired. I thought that was also a pretty fun comment to make because, it forces you to realize like, you don't have to overthink things. You just got to do what feels right to you. And all of those things are just great lessons that you can certainly implement into your own processes and into your own career too. So yeah, I thought that was awesome. I hope you enjoyed that episode too. And if you identified yourself at any point throughout this conversation, whether it's second guessing yourself or not really knowing a process, not knowing what to be listening for, not having confidence, all that kind of stuff, that's exactly what I work with my students on inside of my coaching program, Amplitude. And in that program, I'm working one-on-one with you to help you get your skills and process nailed down so that you know what to be listening for, you know what tools to be using, how to dial in the settings, and ultimately how to finish more of your music and feel proud of the results. And in that program, I'm working one-on-one with you. We're hopping on calls. We're working on mixes together. You're getting feedback. This is 100% actionable stuff that you can take and get the results that you want and have someone in your back pocket who is there to guide you at every stage of the way. So that way you're not having to second guess yourself. You're not losing confidence. Instead, I'm there to just make sure that it's getting done right and give you the skills and process and tips and feedback that you need to achieve the sound that you hear in your head. So if that sounds like something you'd find interesting, make sure to check out masteryourmix.com/amplitude. And on that page, you'll find all the details of the program, but there's also a link where you can book a free production clarity call with me. On this call, I'd love to just learn more about you and your music and what's working, what's not working, and see where I might be able to help you out. See if there's any gaps in your process that I can identify that might be areas to focus on with your skills. It's a no pressure call. Really, it's just about helping you identify where you should be focusing your energy on moving forward. And if I can help you throughout that process, we can talk about what that would look like as well. So once again, if you're interested, just check out masteryourmix.com/amplitude. And with that said, we're at the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit masteryourmix.com.